Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Michelle Heritage, Executive Director of the American Brain Foundation. Michelle, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it very much.
We have a really important conversation today. In the past few months, the cuts to the National Institutes of Health have been steep. A Senate committee minority report estimated that between January and March, the Trump administration cut $2.7 billion of funding from the agency. Another estimate said that the grant cuts were in the neighborhood of $1.8 billion. But what we know, both estimates do say that they are well over $1 billion in just a few months. And a Trump budget plan that was released at the beginning of the month proposed slashing $17 billion from the agency. So first, to start off the conversation, what do you make of these cuts?
Well, the cuts are very, very concerning. What happens with these kinds of cuts? The United States of America has been the global leader in research and breakthroughs in all kinds of health for decades and decades. These kinds of cuts will literally put a halt to that. It also puts a halt to much promising research that's already in motion. Some of it has been going on for years. And basically all of the money that's been invested in that is wasted. It also puts the brakes on many treatments and cures. More than 1 in 3 people in America is going to experience a brain disease. And every single person who lives in this country or anywhere in the world knows somebody or is themselves affected by brain disease. And so this is something that affects every single person in this country. And when you think about these cuts, they really are about the people. It's about your mom who has Alzheimer's or dementia, or your father with Parkinson's, or your son with epilepsy. The things that NIH funds are studies for treatments and cures and new medications for all of these diseases, which many take away our very humanity.
And as you said, everyone in this country is affected in some way, shape, or form from brain disease, meaning it's a nonpartisan issue, or it should be a nonpartisan issue. And I know anyone I've talked to who is affected from this brain disease, whether it be your family member have it, whether you have it yourself, all you want is a cure. So how drastic of these cuts, or will these cuts impact research surrounding brain health?
It's going to have a huge impact. One of the things currently happening, especially in the brain disease and brain health space, is that we are on the precipice of breakthroughs and cures. You can almost think about it like a hot stick that's going to take off. And the reason for that is because of the genomic studies, understanding our DNA and our genes, and artificial intelligence. Those two things together have put us on the precipice of breakthroughs that we have never seen before in all of the history of research on brain disease. And these cuts will literally just put the brakes on all of it.
That sounds really dire. And the fact that we're right there, you're so close to seeing just tremendous leaps and bounds when it comes to brain disease. Does this mean potentially we won't see cures for Alzheimer's, we won't see cures for other of these types of brain diseases ever, or it will just take even longer?
Well, here's the thing. We certainly are going to slow down dramatically breakthroughs in treatments and new medications, and even in the prevention side. We're going to see a dramatic slowdown. In addition to that, when you are doing these kinds of studies, you can't just stop them in their tracks for a while, put them on pause, and then start them back up again. And so we lose years and years. The other thing that's happening is, one of the things the American Brain Foundation does is we help get early career scientists started. We're often their first funding, and what we do is bridge them into these larger fundings from NIH and others. Well, I have talked to many of these early career scientists recently who wonder if there is a career for them in the future. So not only are we losing traction on these diseases because we're not doing the research, we're also losing potentially a generation of young scientists. And that could be a decade's hole that we punch in scientific discovery, because when someone decides they're not going to be a scientist, they're going to do something else, we lose their entire life's work. We have funded more than 300 of these early career scientists. 98% have gone on to get NIH funding. That's how important it is in their career. It's the next step. These scientists have been cited in over 900 patent applications, more than 1 million journal articles, because they're adding to the field. So imagine if those young scientists don't get started, what happens to us for decades on.
That's really scary, just the prospect of a whole generation of young scientists saying, you know what, maybe I need to pivot in my career. But for the doctors and the scientists who are continuing this work or who are in the field right now and they're seeing years and years of research being cut, grants being frozen or just downright terminated, I mean, what are they saying about these cuts, about their research, and about the impact that this has on healthcare at large in this country and around the world?
I would say across the board, they're very, very concerned. When I talk with these scientists, I go and visit these labs and talk with these scientists, there's a feeling of dire concern, real worry about how they're going to continue to do the research that they're doing and the progress that they're doing, and a true, I would say, sadness about not being able to find these cures. These scientists and these doctors are working because they care about people. Oftentimes, they have a history in their own family of someone they've lost. And so they're working from a space that they really care. And the thought of being on the pathway to having these kinds of cures is so disheartening to think that that kind of work could stop and that we would fail to find these cures. We wouldn't have the breakthrough drugs. I mean, there are clinical trials that have been halted that were literally on the precipice of bringing new treatments and drugs to market.
We know that the White House and the Trump administration has been saying that they're trying to cut out the waste, fraud, and abuse in the government. And in their proposal for cutting $17 billion from the agency, this is how they justified it in part. They said this, quote, NIH has broken the trust of the American people with wasteful spending, misleading information, risky research, and the promotion of dangerous ideologies that undermine public health. When you hear that, as someone who works in this health space, someone who understands brain research and the impact that has, I mean, what's your reaction there?
Look, I pay taxes just like you do and everybody else does, and we want our tax dollars to be used in the most effective, efficient way possible. There's always an opportunity at any organization to become better at the work that they do. But I think in this case, we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and we are doing things that are going to have consequences to the public, to our ability to be healthy, to cure horrifying diseases that steal your humanity. I think we're being short-sighted in slashing in the way that we are. The fact is, to do this kind of research, it takes a lot of funding. We've got microscopes that are almost a half a mile long that are looking and we're running labs with, very, very high intense equipment that has to be maintained. The overhead that's happening really has to do with maintaining these very, very precision instruments, the labs, and all the supplies that are needed. When you have to think about what kind of science is being done here, it is the highest level, most innovative, cutting edge kind of work. And so I think that perhaps we've been a little precipitous and little too quick in making these kinds of decisions. I think that we really need to take a pause here and think about really diving in and being very thoughtful in terms of what needs to change, what things could be done in a way that would be more efficient and effective. I actually think we're causing more damage. I'd love to give you an example of what I'm talking about where we're having an unintended consequence. A couple of weeks ago, I went and visited a scientist that we had funded to get his career started years ago at Northwestern. And he's studying delirium. Why is delirium important? Well, because 1 in 5 hospital patients will experience delirium. If you're in the ICU, almost 50 to 80% of ICU patients will experience delirium. Why does that matter? Well, one, if you experience delirium and you're in the ICU, it doubles your mortality risk. So we need to figure out why that's happening. The second thing is the cost of delirium to the U.S. healthcare system, the burden of that is somewhere between about $40 billion and $150 billion a year in the cost of taking care of people that experience delirium. So this scientist is studying the causes of delirium, how we can detect it early on, how we can prevent it, and how an episode of delirium can be shortened. And he shared with me that their funding for the grant that had been running this lab and doing this important work was held up at the NIH. So this is kind of a cutting off your nose to spite your face, because we're going to pay these costs. And so these are the kinds of research that is so important to every one of us. I bet if you asked anybody, do you know someone or have yourself experienced delirium after a surgery or in a hospital visit? The answer is yes. We need to find out what's going on there. We need to prevent it. We need to treat it. But here is a scientist that's concerned about the work he's doing continuing because of funds being held at NIH.
And I was speaking with Forbes' senior healthcare editor, and he echoed the same sentiments here, that the cuts, you're going to feel the impact immediately, but you're also going to feel them for decades to come, because research and breakthroughs don't happen overnight. They happen in 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now. So I want to talk about something that HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said while testifying before the Senate Health Committee earlier this month. He said this about NIH, quote, "We will fund cutting-edge research at the NIH while cutting risky or non-essential studies." Are you skeptical about that? Do you think that a lot of these studies are essential? And what would be your message to him?
Well, I think the definition of what is risky or non-essential is certainly a concern. I mean, we're cutting studies that are specifically looking at, for example, how women differ in terms of responding to certain kinds of drugs and treatment than men. Many of those studies are being discontinued because we don't want to focus just on one gender. But the fact is, women do respond differently to different kinds of treatments. And so I think that we may be, again, not being as thoughtful as we need to be and as careful as we need to be about these kinds of things. The fact is, there are differences among people in how they experience brain disease and brain health, and actually how they respond to treatments and cures. And so I think kind of wiping everything out that may be related to a population which is, not had the kind of access, or frankly, even, women, when you look at some of the things that are being cut, we're cutting specific studies that have to do with studying women's response to neurological disorders. For example, women get Alzheimer's more often than men. We do. Well, we need to find out why. And then we need to like that.
I was just going to ask about that, because to that point, we know that women have higher incidence rates when it comes to Alzheimer's, when it comes to dementia. We also know that funding for the Women's Health Initiative has been in question. As of now, it does seem safe. But in light of these ongoing funding cuts, will there continue to be studies into why women experience Alzheimer's at a higher rate than men?
I think that's the question of the day. And the question is, we don't know if that research is going to continue. And to your point, we need to find out, why is it that women experience that at a higher rate than men do? Even when you account for women tend to outlive men, we still have a higher rate. And so I'm hopeful that these studies will continue. But I will say there's other studies being cut on populations that may also respond differently or have different access to healthcare, that we need to see what those differences are as well. And I think we, again, have kind of wiped the slate clean. We've thrown the baby out with the bathwater, and we need to be more thoughtful, I think, and careful about looking really deeply into the work, making a strategic, thoughtful plan, and then executing against that plan to attain efficiency and effectiveness. I think everybody would be for that. But what we're doing, I think, is a little, it's a little too quick. It's not, we're not having the time to investigate what studies are really, really important, what are showing results in innovation. And we're just kind of pulling the reins back really quickly. That's a problem.
And then when you're looking at healthcare as a whole, especially when it comes to brain health, I mean, with this slimmer NIH budget, does healthcare, does brain health, does the focus on that look radically different in this country, in the Trump administration and beyond?
Well, we are, the brain is the most complex organ in the body. And it is also, it is the seat of our personalities, ourselves, our creativity. And one of the really horrifying things that can happen with brain disease is it can steal your very humanity. And so we really, again, are on this precipice of all of these breakthroughs that are going to be very significant in terms of both preventing and treating some of the most challenging brain diseases that we have experienced. I'm very concerned that pulling back funding at this time, as it becomes a smaller amount of funding, NIH is the largest funder in the United States of biomedical research. There isn't going to be an ability for a private sector or for private donors to fill those gaps. And so we are going to see a slowing of breakthroughs and cures and possibly not even achieving those at all over the next several decades.
Michelle, I appreciate the conversation today. Really important one. You are welcome back anytime as we see continued developments out of NIH and beyond. Thank you again.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.